Buenos días a todos, bienvenidos. Gracias por estar en esta nueva presentación del World Energy Outlook de la Agencia 2021. Es un placer para nosotros, para el club, hacer esta presentación de forma bienal y tener con nosotros a Laura Cocchi para hacer esta presentación. Thank you for coming, Laura. La presentación va a consistir fundamentalmente en una primera parte con intervenciones por parte de la vicepresidenta del club, Ángeles Santamaría, por parte del consejero delegado de EDP España, Rui Teixeira, y por parte de la secretaria de Estado, Sara Agesen, que ha aceptado venir a esta presentación, como ya hicimos el año pasado, ¿no? Posteriormente habrá una presentación por parte de Laura Cocchi, que ya lo ha hecho en muchas ocasiones y como siempre muy bien, de este informe que dará paso también a un coloquio, a unas preguntas que pueden ustedes enviar al chat o pueden enviarlo al correo del club, donde se las transmitiremos a Laura hasta que tenga tiempo. Si no, posteriormente ella se ha comprometido, si no tiene tiempo, a contestarlas personalmente. Y nada más por mi parte, vamos a empezar esta sesión y voy a darle la palabra a Ángeles Santamaría, vicepresidenta del club. Ángeles, por favor.
Buenos días, muchas gracias, Arcadio. Espero que todos os encontréis bien. Bienvenidos y gracias por acompañarnos en esta presentación del World Energy Outlook, la publicación más importante de la Agencia Internacional de la Energía y de un enorme interés para todos los que trabajamos en el mundo energético. En Enerclub llevamos 14 años seguidos presentando sus sucesivas ediciones en nuestro país y hacerlo constituye un verdadero privilegio para nosotros. Hoy presentamos los resultados de la edición del año 2021, tan solo 3 días después de que haya concluido la 26 Conferencia de las Partes de Naciones Unidas, la COP26, y que ya tengamos la vista puesta en la edición de Egipto. El trabajo desarrollado por la agencia, que se presentó el pasado 13 de octubre, ha sido un importante input para las discusiones que han tenido lugar en Glasgow. Por eso creo que este evento se celebra en el mejor momento para conocer también cómo se ha avanzado en las negociaciones sobre el cambio climático. Muchas gracias, por tanto, a la Agencia Internacional de la Energía y especialmente a Laura Cocchi por darnos esta oportunidad y contar siempre con el club como plataforma de difusión de sus interesantes trabajos en nuestro país. Laura, thanks very much for making a space for us in your busy schedule. We would have preferred to have you here physically in Madrid, but unfortunately, for different reasons, it has not been possible. Hopefully, we can meet you in person very soon. Muchas gracias especialmente también a nuestra secretaria de Estado, a la señora Agesen, por acompañarnos. Secretaria, somos conscientes de la cantidad de trabajo que tenéis en el Ministerio en estos momentos y apreciamos muchísimo el esfuerzo que haces para estar aquí con nosotros. Gracias también a Rui Teixeira y a EDP por el patrocinio de este acto y, por supuesto, gracias a todos los asistentes que nos estáis siguiendo en esta sesión. La COP que finalizó el pasado sábado ha sido una cumbre especialmente importante. Ha supuesto una prueba para ver si realmente estamos dispuestos a acelerar la transición energética limpia, aumentando el nivel de ambición y también el número de países comprometidos a alcanzar la neutralidad climática. El hecho de que India y China hayan participado activamente en la cumbre junto a Estados Unidos es alentador. Como decía, la edición del WIO que hoy presentamos se diseñó como una guía para esta última COP. Con esta última publicación, la Agencia Internacional de la Energía aconseja a los gobiernos sobre las medidas y acciones necesarias para cumplir con la meta de limitar el incremento de la temperatura global a 1,5 grados. Uno de sus principales mensajes es la existencia de una gran brecha entre la ambición actual de los países y lo que el mundo necesita para cumplir con dicho objetivo. No obstante, el pasado 4 de noviembre la agencia nos hacía un anuncio que creo que es motivo para ser más optimistas. Según sus estimaciones, con los compromisos anunciados en Glasgow, incluyendo el acuerdo sobre el metano, la brecha se reduciría y la temperatura global aumentaría hasta 1,8 grados centígrados. Seguro que Laura nos va a poder dar más detalles. Es cierto que son solo compromisos y que ahora es necesario que se plasmen en planes concretos, pero creo que es un avance muy importante que nos acerca más al objetivo del 1,5 grados. Precisamente el mantener vivo este objetivo del 1,5 grados es uno de los elementos positivos de la COP, gracias al mecanismo por el que los países deben revisar sus objetivos climáticos en el 2022, en lugar de hacerlo cada 5 años. Creo que, además, el acuerdo alcanzado en Glasgow, después de mucho trabajo y esfuerzo por parte de la presidencia de la COP y de todas las partes, es una buena noticia. Este acuerdo no contiene todos los elementos que los países reclamaban, pero es un paso importante hacia un mundo con emisiones netas cero. Hemos avanzado, pero estamos todavía muy lejos de colocarnos en una senda segura, por lo que hay que seguir trabajando duro para transformar los compromisos y acuerdos en normativas y en hechos. El año pasado, en la presentación del WIO, hablábamos de dos grandes retos mundiales: superar la pandemia y frenar el cambio climático. Estamos viendo grandes avances en el primero de ellos, con las vacunas mostrando un efecto positivo y donde la colaboración y la solidaridad entre todos ha sido fundamental. En el ámbito del cambio climático, como decía, creo que debemos rescatar lo que hemos aprendido durante el COVID de estos 2 últimos años, como que en situaciones críticas todos podemos llegar a dar más de lo esperado trabajando juntos y coordinadamente. El cambio climático es el mayor reto al que nunca se ha enfrentado la sociedad. Somos conscientes de su gravedad, no hay vacuna para frenarlo, pero hay varias cosas que sí que tenemos. Lo primero es la tecnología. Ya en la actualidad contamos con tecnologías como las energías renovables, eólica y solar, que son competitivas y que nos permiten avanzar rápidamente hacia la descarbonización de la electricidad en las próximas décadas. La edición 2021 del WIO que hoy presentamos hace hincapié en este punto, subrayando que todas las tecnologías necesarias para alcanzar los objetivos a 2030 están disponibles. Sin embargo, también advierte que casi la mitad de la reducción de emisiones necesarias para 2050 vendrá de tecnologías que hoy están todavía en fase de demostración o prototipo. Tendremos, por tanto, que seguir haciendo grandes esfuerzos en innovación, desarrollo, para poder ayudarnos para conseguir alcanzar esta neutralidad climática, pero con voluntad política y herramientas adecuadas podremos conseguirlo. Junto con la innovación, la agencia señala otras 3 medidas que serán clave, como son la reducción de emisiones de metano, la eficiencia energética y un mayor impulso a la electrificación libre de emisiones. Además de la tecnología, creo que también podemos ser optimistas porque la implicación por parte de todos es cada vez mayor. Los países firmantes de París han presentado sus planes nacionales y muchos de ellos, como España, ya cuentan con leyes para soportar sus objetivos y políticas. Contamos también con el mundo financiero, que hace años era impensable. Estamos siendo testigos, además, del lanzamiento de numerosos compromisos hacia la neutralidad climática por parte del mundo empresarial y otros muchos actores y sectores. La sostenibilidad ambiental y climática se está haciendo central en todas las áreas de la economía y esto es una gran noticia. Vamos hacia un periodo de grandes transformaciones y de una revolución que quizás sea equivalente a la que sucedió en el siglo XIX. La agencia, en su WIO, habla de una nueva economía energética global. Esa nueva economía debe dar respuesta a los problemas globales, pero también a los problemas concretos de la sociedad. Esto es fundamental porque si nuestras empresas ven mermada su competitividad, si la seguridad de suministro se ve afectada, si los ciudadanos ven cómo aumenta su factura energética y no perciben las oportunidades de creación de empleo y de bienestar que existen, el riesgo de que la transformación energética fracase pudiera ser alto. En el contexto que estamos viviendo a nivel global, de elevados precios de energía y restricciones en la disponibilidad de materias primas, es bueno hacer una llamada de atención sobre estos temas. Necesitamos, además, hacer un especial esfuerzo para que la ciudadanía entienda y perciba las ventajas y las oportunidades de la transición. De lo contrario, no contaremos con su indispensable apoyo. Me consta que la Agencia Internacional de la Energía ha puesto en marcha iniciativas importantes relativas a este área, como la Global Commission, centrada en las personas, en la que participan varios países, incluyendo España, cuyas iniciativas en transición justa están siendo referencia internacional. Creo, y con esto quiero terminar, que la agencia está haciendo un trabajo excepcional, reconocido a nivel global, como se ha puesto de manifiesto en Glasgow. Y prueba de ello son también los numerosos reconocimientos que ha recibido. Y esto no sería posible sin su brillante equipo. Quisiera darle la palabra a continuación a Rui Teixeira, agradeciéndole de nuevo su presencia y el patrocinio de EDP. Rui, por favor, adelante. Muchas gracias.
Muchas gracias, Ángeles. Muchas gracias también a la secretaria de Estado, Sarah Gessen, por dedicar su tiempo a esta presentación. Sabemos que son tiempos muy complejos. Y también a nuestra invitada, Laura Cossi, por este trabajo que nos viene a presentar, que realmente es un trabajo de muchísima profundidad de muchísima calidad, que debo decir que nosotros que trabajamos en el sector energético, pues siempre dedicamos bastante de nuestro tiempo a leer y a escuchar exactamente estas visiones, no solo a nivel global, pero también de muy largo plazo. Yo creo que incluso en este informe hay no solo visiones sobre lo que serían escenarios como el Net Zero Emissions para 2050, que por supuesto cada vez más es un tema que nos va a ocupar, entender qué significa este tipo de escenarios, pero también introducir conceptos muy importantes que vemos al día de hoy como seguridad energética, el papel de la demanda, en fin, temas que cada vez más van a estar en la actualidad de nuestro sector energético. Naturalmente que es incluso más interesante poder hacer estas discusiones sobre estos escenarios justo 3 días después de la COP26. Que por un lado yo creo que todos nosotros nos gustaríamos ver una evolución un poco más rápida, en particular sobre lo que supone generación con carbón, pero por otro lado es un hecho de que hay un reconocimiento sobre la necesidad de acelerar esta transición energética que estamos viviendo y lo que supone acelerar también algunas inversiones. Y es efectivamente sobre estas inversiones que me gustaría hacer algún pequeño comentario. En esta edición del World Energy Outlook 2021, pues yo creo que se hace una clara alerta, que es lo que son las actuales inversiones, los niveles de inversiones que tenemos son insuficientes para cumplir con este reto de transición y este reto en términos energéticos y climáticos. Para realmente llegar a un net zero en 2050, esto supondría que tendríamos de triplicar las inversiones en energías limpias, en proyectos de energía limpias y también en infraestructuras. Y esto significa llegar a 2030 con 4 billones en cifras europeas de dólares de inversión, que es un reto tremendo, incluso porque un 70% de este valor o de este importe debería invertirse en países en desarrollo, que naturalmente tiene un coste de capital bastante más elevado, que este informe incluso dice que puede llegar hasta 7 veces lo que es el coste de capital de los países desarrollados. Esto supone entonces que hay que tener no solo definir muy bien cuál sería este camino de inversión, pero tener una alianza entre el capital público y el capital privado, porque al final esto supone un trabajo conjunto muy cercano entre el sector público y el sector privado de cara a poder materializar estas inversiones. Yo creo que en los países desarrollados, desde luego en el caso de España, pues hay un plan muy bien definido sobre lo que supone hacer esta transición energética. El Plan Nacional supone una inversión de unos 240.000 millones de euros, que es en sí mismo también bastante ambiciosa. Creo que en España, pues todo el sector está preparado en el sentido de que entiende lo que es necesario definir de nuevos modelos de negocios, de qué tecnologías son las tecnologías que deberíamos estar invirtiendo, algunas ya maduras, otras aún en desarrollo, pero que son tecnologías que tendrán de tener, donde habrá que hacer alguna capacidad de inversión. Es fundamental también buscar las mejores soluciones para la aplicación de los fondos europeos, que suponen una inversión un poco más acelerada en algunas tecnologías que al día de hoy no están maduras y con lo cual hay que desarrollarlas para llevárselas a su punto óptimo en términos de costes. Naturalmente que para esto es fundamental seguir, como hasta ahora, con una visión muy clara en términos de políticas, en términos de regulación y que permita tener este confort sobre inversiones a largo plazo y seguridad en lo que es el contexto en que se están aportando este capital. Hay una otra dimensión y que para nosotros EDP también es, como agente económico en España, es fundamental, que es no solo, además de tener esta visión de ser neutro en términos carbónicos, bueno, incluso antes de 2050, incluso nosotros nos proponemos 2030, pero que es que hagamos toda esta transición de forma justa, garantizando que todos los ciudadanos, pero desde luego las personas que están en las comunidades más afectadas por esta transición se sientan involucradas y se sientan participantes donde puedan beneficiar también de lo que es esta transición que se está haciendo. Entonces, este componente de transición justa, de garantizar que desde el punto de vista social existe este equilibrio y esta justicia, creemos que es fundamental de cara a que se pueda hacer un buen desarrollo y se puede realmente acelerar toda esta inversión que supone llevarnos a una neutralidad carbónica hasta 2050, ojalá mucho antes de 2050. Yo nada más que agradecer también a Laura, porque realmente este informe que luego nos presentará entra en mucha profundidad, no solo en distintos escenarios, pero en las distintas consecuencias de lo que supone llevarnos a una neutralidad carbónica. Pero justo yo creo que hoy es el momento, no solo porque salimos de la COP de la COP26, pero también es el momento por todo el estrés que estamos viendo en muchos mercados a nivel internacional, que realmente nos lleva a hablar sobre soluciones estructurales, lo que estructuralmente debemos hacer hacia el futuro y no solamente estar pues, buscando soluciones de muy corto plazo. Así que muchísimas gracias, Laura, y con esto yo pasaría a la palabra, creo que a la secretaria de Estado. Muchas gracias.
Muchas gracias, muchísimas gracias, Rui. Buenos días, muy buenos días a todos y sobre todo gracias por darme la oportunidad de estar aquí en esta presentación de, como bien decíais tanto Rui como Ángeles, en esta presentación de un informe de referencia internacional como es el WEO 2021. Gracias al Club Español de la Energía, gracias a EDP por patrocinar este evento y muchísimas gracias. Thank you very much, Laura. Por estar aquí un año más, ¿no? Y presentarnos esos resultados y compartir con todos nosotros y trasladarnos los principales mensajes del WEO. Como todos sabéis, llevamos año tras año teniendo la oportunidad de recibir los resultados desde 1998 de este informe, un informe de referencia que nos sirve para el diseño de políticas públicas, también para la asignación de inversiones que nos permitan reforzar mensajes y también políticas en cosas tan importantes como la seguridad de suministro, como el impulso del crecimiento económico, pero algo también tan esencial, ¿no? Que también han destacado Ángeles y Rui, como acelerar el cumplimiento de los compromisos climáticos. La pasada edición del WEO, el WEO 2020, estuvo muy orientada a la década 21-30, yo creo que muy acertadamente, con detalles sobre cuál ha sido el impacto de la pandemia, cuál ha sido el impacto de la COVID sobre el sector energético, sobre la economía en general y cómo deberíamos trabajar todos los países, todos los gobiernos, la identificación de acciones en el corto y en el medio plazo para salir de esta crisis sanitaria en esa recuperación económica en clave verde, ¿no? Y yo creo que ese mensaje fue compartido por muchas agencias internacionales y por distintos expertos. Por primera vez, además, el WEO el año pasado incluyó ese escenario tan importante, tan esencial, el Net Zero Emissions by 2050, esa neutralidad climática en 2050, donde se analizaban de una manera muy clara cuáles eran las necesidades y cuáles eran los grandes desafíos que teníamos por delante para definir, para limitar ese calentamiento global a esa temperatura de 1,5 grados. Yo, así de modo resumen, ¿no? El año pasado, en ese WEO 2020, destacaría dos grandes mensajes. Mensajes que yo creo que siguen estando en ese WEO 2021. Primero, avisar de esa necesidad de incrementar la ambición climática, esa urgencia en la ambición climática por parte de todos los gobiernos. Pero también señalaba la importancia de desarrollar esos planes de recuperación, como decía, en respuesta a la COVID en clave verde. Desde entonces, en Europa hemos trabajado sin parar y hemos avanzado, yo creo, en cosas muy importantes. En ese marco estable, adoptando el marco legislativo, la Ley de Cambio Climático a nivel europeo, una ley que define ese objetivo de neutralidad climática, yo lo destacaría, pero además fija un objetivo intermedio en el año 2030, el objetivo de reducción de al menos un 55% en el año 2030. También destacar en ese transcurso desde el WEO 2020 al WEO 2021 cómo la Comisión Europea ha puesto encima de la mesa un paquete de propuestas legislativas, ese paquete que se llama Fit for 55, con actuaciones y medidas para permitirnos avanzar en la consecución de objetivos intermedios, ese objetivo en el año 2030. Destacaría el incremento de la penetración de energías renovables, tan necesario, de ese objetivo del 32 que teníamos encima de la mesa hasta el 40%, o los objetivos de eficiencia energética, que tienen que avanzar de ese 32,5 a un 36-39%. Pero también hoy me gusta compartir algo importante y es que en España, como bien decía Rui, estamos preparados. Llevamos trabajando desde hace mucho tiempo, tenemos un paquete muy sólido, ese Plan Nacional Integrado de Energía y Clima, que nos permite avanzar a ese objetivo común europeo del 55% y algo tan importante como nuestra propia ley, una ley de cambio climático y transición energética la Ley 7/2021, donde definimos un escenario en el corto, en el medio y en el largo plazo. Un plan de energía y clima que tiene 70 medidas, más de 70 medidas de lo más variopinto, abordando desde la eficiencia energética de manera estructural en la industria, en la rehabilitación de viviendas, hasta un nuevo sistema de subastas tan importante para el despliegue de esas energías renovables, comparable a de países que tenemos en nuestro entorno, que da señales que consideramos adecuadas para la inversión y seguridad a largo plazo, pero también permite algo tan importante en esta crisis de precios de la energía que estamos viviendo, ¿no? Permitir que nosotros, todos y cada uno de los ciudadanos, tengamos unos precios de la energía cada vez más reducidos, unas facturas que nos permitan avanzar en esa electrificación, esas señales que necesitamos tener todos los ciudadanos para apostar por la electrificación de la economía. Medidas como la electrificación del transporte, el cambio modal, la sostenibilidad, el impulso a la generación descentralizada o el autoconsumo, ¿no? Que en España vemos cómo tenemos cada vez resultados más positivos. La Ley de Cambio Climático y Transición Energética, algo en el que hemos venido trabajando muchísimo tiempo, yo creo que es un pilar esencial de esas medidas, como decía, a corto, a medio y a largo plazo, en las que se sitúa la transición ecológica y con ello la transición energética en el pilar de esa descarbonización, consagrando en España ese objetivo de neutralidad climática y consagrando los objetivos de eficiencia energética, de energías renovables, de electrificación de la economía, fijando objetivo de electricidad por fuentes renovables para el año 2030. Por lo tanto, yo diría que respecto a esas recomendaciones o ese informe que Laura también nos presentó el año pasado, Europa y España todos hemos avanzado y hemos trabajado en esa ambición, pero también hemos trabajado en ese segundo bloque que comentaba, ¿no? Esos planes de recuperación, transformación y resiliencia que vienen de la mano de Next Generation EU. Todos los Estados miembros, yo creo que nos hemos dedicado con mucha intensidad, a pesar de la pandemia en el año 2020 y principios del 2021, a abordar ese diseño de los planes de recuperación en clave verde y han sido aprobados. Yo creo que es un avance muy rápido y muy necesario para esta transformación acelerada. En España, nuestro plan de recuperación, transformación y resiliencia se ha diseñado pensando en esa modernización y transformación de nuestro tejido productivo en torno a esos 4 pilares. Yo diría la transición ecológica, la digital, la cohesión social y territorial tan importante en nuestro país y la igualdad de género. De hecho, el 40% de esos recursos que se destinan en el plan de recuperación son para afrontar el cambio climático, son para transición ecológica, pero yo creo que más importante todavía es destacar que todas las actuaciones, todas las reformas, todas las inversiones que están incluidas en ese plan pasan por un filtro muy importante, que es que no pueden producir un daño significativo sobre el medio ambiente, garantizar que ninguna reforma y ninguna medida tiene un impacto negativo sobre el medio ambiente. Yo creo que esto es algo esencial y que siempre me gusta destacar. En lo que respecta a fondos, responsabilidad de esta Secretaría de Estado de Energía, tenemos que movilizar más de 10.000 millones entre el año 2021 y 2023 en distintos programas: fomento de las energías renovables, de la eficiencia energética, del autoconsumo, del almacenamiento, la gestión de la demanda, la flexibilidad, las redes inteligentes, nuevos vectores que están por llegar y que son importantes en esa descarbonización, como el hidrógeno renovable o, por ejemplo, la promoción de la electrificación del transporte. Además, contamos con algo muy importante que también han destacado tanto Ángeles como Rui, esa condición de contorno que para nosotros es esencial, es abordar esta transformación pensando también en el reto demográfico y pensando en algo tan importante como que esa transición tiene que ser justa y tiene que ser inclusiva. Yo creo que en España desde el principio lo hemos tenido muy claro, es clave de éxito ir acompañando en esa transformación, en ese puente, desde donde estamos hasta donde queremos llegar. Y ahora nos encontramos en este año 2021, tenemos la suerte de volver a escuchar a Laura en la presentación de los resultados de ese WEO 2021 y el escenario yo diría que es más positivo si hablamos de la pandemia. Poco a poco tenemos señales positivas, aunque desde el punto de vista de la crisis climática los resultados todavía no son muy halagüeños y queda mucho trabajo por hacer. Yo diría o destacaría que, como dice el WEO, El año 2020 sigue siendo un año importante donde las fuentes de energía renovables, la eólica y la fotovoltaica, siguen creciendo con mucha fuerza. Para mí eso es muy importante. También la venta de vehículos eléctricos registra nuevos récords históricos, con lo cual es otro mensaje muy positivo, a pesar de una situación económica, social especialmente complicada. La transición está aquí, la transición energética llega para quedarse. Yo diría que a pesar de esos esfuerzos que hemos realizado, el informe destaca que todavía queda muchísimo camino por recorrer. Tenemos que trabajar en ambición, tenemos que trabajar en acciones climáticas a nivel global y queda muy claro algo muy importante. El año 2020 el consumo de carbón sigue subiendo, esto es algo que tenemos que cambiar, esa tendencia es muy importante. El gasto público, los paquetes de recuperación han sido importantes, pero no son suficientes. Solo ha modificado un poquito, necesitamos aumentar muchísimo más las inversiones y en tercer lugar los compromisos que ya están anunciados a corto plazo o a medio plazo, a 2030, solo cubren menos del 20% de ese gap necesario, con lo cual tenemos que seguir actuando con premura. La puerta o la ventana de oportunidad, como dice el informe del WEO, tiene que ser ahora, las actuaciones tienen que llegar lo antes posible para no aumentar la temperatura por encima de ese 1,5 grados. Yo creo que esta década hasta el 2030 es crucial, es una década complicada, turbulenta, de transformaciones. Tenemos que permitir, yo diría que uno de los grandes retos es permitir que la sociedad vea los beneficios y las oportunidades de la transición ahora, no esperar dentro de 5 o 10 años. Lo tienen que ver, como decía también Ángeles, la vicepresidenta del club, ahora, lo antes posible. Para eso todos tenemos que trabajar de la mano. No podemos esperar, tenemos que tomar acciones urgentes y yo diría que el informe vuelve a destacar dos cosas muy importantes, ¿no? Ese gap de la ambición y ese gap de la financiación de las inversiones que destacaba Rui. Y por lo tanto tenemos que trabajar en las dos patas. Y un día como hoy, igual que mis compañeros en esta sesión, yo diría que también tengo que destacar los mensajes de Glasgow, ¿no? Una COP que finalizó el pasado sábado, que desde mi punto de vista sigue siendo un éxito porque es un éxito del multilateralismo. Todos, para abordar el cambio climático, tenemos que trabajar conjuntamente. Se ha alcanzado un texto final donde vuelve a mantener vivo ese compromiso de que la temperatura del planeta no puede superar los 1,5 grados. Mantienen vivo ese compromiso, yo diría, primero porque llama a reducir el consumo, el uso de carbón, porque llama a poner fin también a los subsidios de los combustibles fósiles, porque admite de una manera muy clara que los esfuerzos, tal cual también dice el WEO 2021, hasta la fecha son insuficientes, que tenemos que seguir actuando de manera urgente y porque se pone un objetivo encima de la mesa de reducción global de las emisiones al 45% en el año 2030. También, como destacabais, el año que viene el secretario general de Naciones Unidas va a convocar a todos los líderes para hablar de ambición ya el año 2022. La adaptación se pone en el centro, es algo muy importante cuando hablamos de mitigación. Nosotros cuando hablamos de energía yo creo que estamos muy focalizados en la mitigación, pero los dos pilares estoy convencida que tienen que ir de la mano y se establece un programa de trabajo técnico para abordar esta adaptación y ayudar a medir en qué manera vamos mejorando en materia de adaptación y se insta a duplicar la financiación en adaptación para el año 2025 en comparación con el año 2019. Y por último, yo destacaría algo muy importante. Se reconoce esa brecha nuevamente en la financiación y se presenta un plan para que el año 2023 se consiga eso que se acordó en París, ¿no? Que se movilicen 100.000 millones de dólares al año. De Glasgow también otro mensaje que yo creo que es muy importante es que sigue siendo muy activo se ha reforzado el papel de la justicia climática y el importante papel que juegan no solo los gobiernos que estamos presentes en esas negociaciones, sino la interlocución con los agentes no gubernamentales, ¿no? Las empresas, las ONGs, la juventud, la sociedad civil, los pueblos indígenas. Yo creo que esa voz, sabemos que el reto del cambio climático solo se afronta de manera conjunta y todos ellos han estado muy presentes en esta cumbre de Glasgow. Yo diría que en conclusión, si queremos alcanzar esa neutralidad climática, necesitamos seguir avanzando de forma acelerada, sabemos cómo se puede hacer, tenemos que trabajar todas de la mano, un modelo más limpio, más eficiente, más socialmente inclusivo, tiene que ser justo. No tenemos tiempo que perder, tenemos las conclusiones del WEO que vamos a escuchar de la mano de Laura Cozzi. Yo estoy muy agradecida como siempre, pero también tenemos las conclusiones de la COP que se han alcanzado como habéis visto hace tan solo 3 días. Hay que reforzar los foros y los acuerdos multilaterales para hacer frente a esta crisis climática y sobre todo, insisto, agradecer muchísimo el papel de la agencia en ese conocimiento, esos estudios, esos foros que nos permiten avanzar en la profundidad de los datos, ¿no? Que a veces los gobiernos o las empresas no tenemos esa capacidad y vosotros nos dais esos instrumentos. Con lo cual, muchísimas gracias y muchísimas gracias también al Club y a EDP por permitirme estar hoy aquí. Gracias.
Muchas gracias, Sara. Para finalizar, quisiera presentaros a Laura Cozzi. Laura lleva desde 1999 trabajando en la Agencia Internacional de Energía y ha contribuido a más de 20 ediciones del WIO. Desde el 2018 es Chief Energy Modeler y Head of the Demand del Outlook Division, el departamento responsable de la elaboración del WIO. Laura también tiene experiencia en el ámbito de las empresas privadas porque antes de unirse a la agencia trabajó para la empresa italiana Eni. Tiene un máster en Ingeniería Ambiental de la Politécnica de Milán y un máster en Economía Energética Ambiental de Eni Corporate Universidad. Y por mi parte nada más, solo volver a darle las gracias a todos y darle a Laura la enhorabuena por todo su trabajo y en particular por esta nueva edición del World Energy Outlook que además por primera vez este año es gratuita. Laura, the floor is yours.
Buenos días, good morning, and thank you very much, first of all, to the Spanish Energy Lab, because, well, Angeles, Arcadio, Ana, and the entire team, I don't count anymore in years for how many years we have been working together and the partnership. I start counting in decades, so I think it really shows it's a great friendship. So many thanks for having me and having us again today. Many thanks to EDP for allowing this event to happen. And a huge thanks to the Secretary of State that I know is incredibly busy for taking the time to be here with us. I think is really a sign of the strong ties that the IEA has with Spain that are becoming stronger and stronger. Angeles mentioned earlier that Spain was involved in a very important commission we have put forward at the IEA, so with the minister. And I have to say, so this was a commission on just transition, and the role of Spain in this commission was, I don't want to underestimate, it was really essential. As we are able to put forward 40 ministers together, put forward real examples on how to handle the more difficult part of the transition, how to put people at the center. You have been there and showing how policies can be put forward and be successful to bring all parts of the society together. So huge success. We also have, I don't know if this is as well known, we have Spain chairing one of the most important committees at the IEA that is leading to the ministerial meeting in February. So also another key contribution there. And finally, I want to mention that we also have Pablo Gonzalez that is part of the WIO team. So really, a really very round cooperation on all items. Now, without any further ado, I'd like to go and share with you what are the main findings of this year Outlook, and they have been updated, as was mentioned earlier by already a couple of colleagues during the COP negotiations. So before getting into Glasgow, if we put ourselves actually 6 years ago, when in November, when we were starting to negotiate the Paris Agreement, the expectation from us, but also from the IPCC and many others, was that fossil fuel use and therefore CO2 emissions would have continued to grow. So when we were entering the Paris Agreement, the expectation was that temperature increase by the end of the century would have been around 3.5 degrees. Now we know from the IPCC latest report in August, this would have led to catastrophic climate change. Now, 6 years after, if we just take into account what has been put in law, so not the pledges, what has been put in law globally, we already have a very different outcome. So we have already started seeing a decoupling between economic growth and emissions. We would expect, of course, emissions are rebounding very strongly. We acknowledge that this year They may continue to grow next year, but after that, you actually see a very small growth and then kind of a plateau. This is only with policies that are in law today. So 3 things have happened since Paris. Many countries, Europe at the lead, have put forward a new set of policies, very effective, new technologies, costs are going down from renewables to electric vehicles. So technology is a large chunk there. And of course, COVID has changed a bit some of the relations vis-a-vis economic growth and energy use, but has a smaller impact compared to the previous one. Now we have Glasgow. And Glasgow, what did is that over the past 1 year, so basically over the past 1 year, you couldn't hear much about talking about putting in place a net zero pledge, neither from countries nor from companies. This has changed completely. Now net zero has become the new currency in the climate and energy debate. So out of Glasgow, we have a huge amount, nearly 90% of greenhouse gas emissions that are covered by some form of net zero pledge. This means that, I underline a if, all pledges are met, what we would be seeing is that in this decade, CO2 emissions will start declining while we still have economic growth. I have to say that us as human beings, we were never able to do so. So this is really the beginning of what we would call the new global industrial revolution with growth in GDP and declining CO2 emissions. Now, our latest assessment basically is what Angeles mentioned earlier. This will lead by 2100 as a temperature increase of 1.8 degrees. Now, sometimes it's difficult to actually understand that 1.8 still is leading to very high cost in terms of adaptation. So we need to work more, but it's also the first time that any agreement, any pledge leads us to something that is below 2 degrees. So something certainly to praise. What are the implications on energy markets? Important, very significant. So we are not looking at a repetition of the past. So with policies that are in law, this decade was very much resemble the previous one. Continued growth in oil demand, continued growth in gas demand, solar and PV generation, of course, growing very strongly, but in a way, this would be a very turbulent weather accompanied by very turbulent markets. However, if we are able to implement what was pledged in Glasgow, we would have a very different outlook ahead of us. For the first time, this decade would see a peak in global oil demand in the middle of this decade, a peak in global gas demand in the middle of this decade, and very strong and robust growth for solar and wind. Now, why do we think that we could see this peak in oil demand? Clearly, what we're seeing in electric vehicles is unprecedented. The number of countries that are phasing out sales of internal combustion engine. The global car manufacturers, 18 out of 20, have now clear pledges on either the amount of electric vehicles that they want to sell or zero emission vehicles that they want to sell, or pledges themselves of phasing out ICE. So global movement that is attacking the very base of oil demand. Passenger car account for 20% of oil demand, and for the first time, we would see this segment, instead of increasing, actually declining at the global level. If you look at September data on electric vehicle sales, in Europe, we sold 20% of the cars sold were electric. This is not only in Europe. In China, the number was very, very similar. So you have 2 out of the top 3 global car markets that are moving very strongly towards electrification. Natural gas is a bit more complex as a story. To simplify it, basically, we are starting to see a dent in natural gas demand for power generation use. In mid-load, we will still continue to use gas in a moment of a peak, as it's been the case, for example, in October when wind was not necessarily blowing. So we are seeing a decline in the overall amount, annual amount of gas used in power generation in countries with net zero pledges, Europe, but also the United States and several others. And at the same time, if we push forward the efficiency of buildings with this renovation wave that, for example, Europe has put forward, but not only Europe, we start seeing less need of natural gas for heating because our building stocks starts becoming more efficient and switches to electrification that is more and more clean, more and more powered by renewables, solar, wind. So really changing the outlook for fossil fuel for this decade for the first time in so many years. What about coal? Well, coal is a bit of a two-side story here, I would say. First of all, if we look at existing coal power generation plants, we very often say that the past decade was a decade of records for renewables. We forget it was also the record of high installation for coal. And we have never installed as many coal-fired power plants as the last decade. Those are still clearly here with us and generating and will be generating electricity for many years to come. But if you look at the outlook for new coal power generation, well, this is pretty different from what we had seen in the past. Sorry, I'm going in the wrong direction here with the clicks. What I want to show you is that the remainder of new installation, once you take into account the ending of financial support of China, and at COP, we actually heard more end of financial support. Basically, our assessment is that we will see some continued installation in this current decade, but then after this, no longer new coal-fired power plants. This is a very clearly historic moment. If you look at only the amount that is going to be saved of CO2 emissions from this China announcement of stop financing coal abroad, these savings alone are equal to Europe getting to net zero by 2050. This is a huge, huge amount of emission savings that actually goes along. This was mentioned earlier. There is clearly an environmental benefit. There is also an economic benefit because in many cases, this would be replaced with cheaper sources, mostly renewables. So this is a glass half empty and half full. So this is the half full. The half empty is that if you look at what a CO2 emission trajectory that is fully compliant with getting to net zero by 2050 would look like, we're still far from that. So we're coming out of Glasgow with more work to be done that is being passed at the Egypt COP next year and the UAE COP the next year. So let's zoom in to 2030. There are a couple of jobs here to understand. First, clearly making sure that what has been pledged in Glasgow will materialize. And this is one story in itself. So making sure that the pledges don't remain such, but become policies. But there is another equally important job here. We have heard a lot about net zero by 2060, net zero by 2070, net zero by 2050. But if you look closer, 2030, it's not really matching the longer term ambition. So we need to scale up the 2030 targets to make sure that we actually get to net zero by 2050, 60 or 70. And currently we actually see a bit of a mismatch. So what's being pledged for the longer term is not really backed by neither ambition nor policies for 2030. So we have done this gap analysis looking at what we would need to bridge. So this is a job for next year that remains. We will need to bridge still a lot of emissions by 2030. The good news is actually that more than 40% of those emissions would come in a cost-effective way, meaning that if you go this way, the clean way, or the dirty way, for the consumer, the cost will be exactly the same. So there are no real economic reason behind not pushing more. So we need to work with countries to make sure that there is an understanding that there are still measures that could be put forward without any extra economic cost to consumers. What are those? They were mentioned earlier. Clearly the power sector, and why is the power sector one of the key one? Remember, is this large coal that is still continuing to generate, but with the newest generations of wind, onshore and offshore, with the new generation of solar, those new plants can generate electricity at lower cost than even existing coal in some places in the planet. So we could push this forward, and this would dent on the generation from coal. There is other options, which is repowering and extending the life of hydropower, and in some cases, nuclear time extension or new nuclear in countries where it's being built. Russia, I mentioned one where they are able to build new nuclear fire plants in between 5 to 7 years. So that could be an option, always denting coal. And where we have existing nuclear and the security and the safety is proven, in some cases that nuclear lifetime extension could also save some emission. The other big part for us was methane. We were very happy to see the global methane pledge being put forward. You know, the big number is minus 30% in terms of overall methane emissions. But if you look only at the energy sector, our assessment is actually that the emissions from the energy sector, methane emissions, so here we're talking mostly about leakage and venting when you produce oil and gas, is that you can actually abate 75% of them. Technology is known, policies is known, and costs are very limited. So we will continue to work with countries to make sure that the energy sector take a larger part of the decline that would allow to meet the 30%, leaving then agriculture and later other parts to contribute in the longer term. Finally, combination of energy efficiency and electrification. Again, the energy efficiency, I'd say, is mostly new standards for new products, appliances, your new refrigerator, your new computer, your new iPhones, etc. And at the same time, electrification of heating, which is becoming really the next challenge to face globally. Produce heat with low CO2 emissions is the area where we could see further enhancement. So for us, this is the job that remains out of Glasgow. So increasing the ambition, at least for the part that is cost effective, and making sure that the pledges are really implemented. Now, if we look at what's happening in terms of changes in energy related trade, today, oil remains the largest energy-related commodity. You see a very dominant role in trade volumes of physical volumes, but equally money terms. Now, if we go fast forward in different energy sector transformation, what has been pledged at COP, and if you were to accelerate and go to a net zero scenario, you see some important transformation happening. Oil remains there, but loses importance. But there are two other main elements that start surging and become critical. The first one is critical minerals, and the second is hydrogen. So we are highlighting both as critical in emerging and making sure that energy security is kept going forward. So oil remain, we shouldn't forget that. It's not that oil is dropped, we forget about it. Oil security remains. We are seeing these now very high prices. So we are not expecting this to disappear. I'll come to this in a second. The important point of this slide is actually that critical minerals, lithium, cobalt, and so on, that are needed for the wires to transmit electricity, for our electric vehicles and for batteries in general, for the wind turbines, for solar. Those are becoming hugely, hugely important. So energy ministries, everyone working on the energy sector, watch this out. This is a space that is going to become essential to make sure that the products are delivered to market on time and there are no bumps in the clean energy transition. The other item, hydrogen. Now, a couple of things. Here you see that hydrogen is 35% of the value of trade, very large. If you look at the share of hydrogen in a net zero scenario, it's much smaller than that, but it remains a very expensive fuel, and part of it is traded. So in all our assessments, even when we push, and we push quite strongly for domestic green hydrogen, so electrolyzers via renewables to oversimplify, you still have cost differential. So some of that will still make economic sense to trade it. And this remains a very, very expensive, a bit of a champagne fuel going forward, and takes a very large role in the value of commodity. So it's becoming important, is an essential component. It's not super large, so it's not, we shouldn't think that we go from a fossil fuel-based economy to a hydrogen economy. It's not the case. So fossil fuels today account for 80% of our matrix. Hydrogen would count for 10. So it's not a hydrogen economy, but hydrogen in the value of energy trade is gonna become an essential commodity. Now, let's link to what's happening nowadays. We spoke about the high energy prices that we are seeing in Europe, not only in India, we're seeing something similar in China as well. So there are several reasons for that, and I'll come to the end of the slide explaining those. But if you look at investments, what's happening today is that basically the oil and gas production investment are very well aligned with what we would need on to be compliant with the net zero scenario. However, investments in the clean energy transition, so the demand part of the equation, are very far from what we would need. So you can see here, if I manage again, is actually more than a factor 3 lower than what we would need. So we are investing on supply aligned as if we were on a net zero scenario, but the demand part of the equation, our EVs, the network that is needed to charge the EVs, the retrofit of our buildings, renewables, is far from being on track. If you go to a more nuanced story here, I'm very glad that Secretary of State mentioned the sustainable recovery plans that governments are putting around the globe. We are actually tracking those now. And what we see is that Europe, very recently, basically yesterday, the United States, Canada, Japan, Korea have been using the post-recovery stimulus to generate what we will call a sustainable recovery. And when we see the amount of investment that is being promised and how much we would need to be on track with net zero for advanced economies, we are not doing so bad. We are actually nearly 70% of the overall investment we would need over the next 3 to 5 years. We had never seen anything like that before. Now, we need to make sure that these investments are channeled, that the private capital flows in, but we are doing pretty well. If we look at emerging markets and developing economies, it's a completely different story. We are only 10% of the level of investment needed. Now, here is really where we need to step up. And we cannot blame really all developing countries for not moving fast enough. There have been really urgent, pressing pandemic situation related issues that have put the accent on health. Not only they have been facing it, they are facing very high cost of borrowing. Very different situation from what we see in Europe, in the United States. So this has really put a break in the transition. I don't enter the more geopolitical part of the 100 billion that was discussed at COP, but there is a lot of issues that are really preventing now the scale up in ambition in emerging markets. And this is where we think a lot of the focus on negotiations on the private sector of the MDBs should be in the years to come. I will conclude with discussing now the opportunities of the clean energy transition. So we have actually tracked 5, so it's not even exhaustive, there could be more technologies that we see essential for getting to net zero. Here you see solar, wind, battery packs, electrolyzers, fuel cells. As I said, we are expecting more than this coming up in the years to come. But only with this, we have estimated that basically the market for those is going to grow hugely. And sometimes we don't really grasp how huge these markets are going to be. This is only for the technology part. So if you want, it's just the engineering. So producing this technology and bringing them to the market. The size of this is going to be as large as oil markets by the end of this decade, if we move in line with a net zero by 2050 or a few years later. So it's a huge market opportunity where we see the first movers and the first takers to really take a competitive advantage and go into markets that will only grow larger going forward. So a very clear signal here for companies that for us, the ones that position themselves could grasp very clearly huge benefits and increasing markets going forward. I'd like to spend a couple of minutes on the conclusions here and tie a bit more with the current price situation that we're seeing. So we have been following clearly what's happening in energy markets, and some of the comments we have heard on the roots of the situation of why we're seeing high gas prices and electricity prices don't see us in agreement. So we have read often, in some cases, not always, that actually this is the first crisis of the clean energy transition, and the clean energy transition is at the cause of what we're seeing. This is not what we numbers at hand see. So we identify 3 key reasons of the current energy market situation. The first, we are experiencing unprecedented economic growth. We need to go back 50 years to see this type of economic growth, and this is being fueled by energy. So this is a first fact. Energy demand is growing and growing strongly. This was expected. Second fact, if you look at supply, and in particular supply of gas to Europe, and if you look at unplanned outages, this year we have seen 40% more unplanned outages than the previous year. Now, there is also geopolitical considerations about Russia. You have heard what our executive director has been saying. We could have seen more gas coming from Russia, including in the storage. So we have seen some movement in that direction. So very high energy demand. Second, supply side, gas supply side issues. And third, weather-related issues, cold winter at the beginning of the year and a week of low wind in Europe in October have caused these spikes. To be very honest, if we had moved forward faster on the transition, so if our homes were more efficient, if we had started the heat pump rollouts, if we have moved more on flexibility side, we would have been more sheltered from this price spikes. So for us, this is something that the narrative of it shouldn't be spinned in the wrong way for our consumers, for the energy markets readers in general, not to spin this in the wrong way, saying this is the first crisis of the clean energy transition. It has very much roots in the existing system. Now, COP and outcomes. Clearly, for the first time, we are seeing a possible outcome if all the pledges are met that is below 2 degrees. It has never happened before. However, very clear signal that for 2030, we are still lacking ambition and coherence with the longer term goals on 4 key areas: clean electrification, efficiency, methane abatement, and innovation. For us, those are the key gaps on which we are expecting then countries and governments to continue to work forward towards Egypt and beyond. Now, what is this decade ahead of us going to look like? If the situation that we are seeing now persists of mismatch of seeing only oil and gas supply investment being aligned with net zero, but all the rest not, well, then we are setting ourselves for a very, very bumpy road ahead. This is clear. However, I have to say that the signals, at least in advanced economies, of most advanced economies, we are seeing in terms of fiscal outlays is promising, and months after months being more and more aligned with what we would consider a necessary investment for net zero. Now, again, as we said for COP, the materialization and being able to channel those investments is what we will be looking, watch out to make sure that we align as quickly as possible with the transition. Huge mismatch that remains in emerging economies, and something has to be done there. Otherwise, again, this is the areas of the world where energy demand is growing faster and will determine prices globally. So a laser focus there for us, it's going to be needed soon. We are really open door, still very clear signs that we see now on the global new energy economy. Electrification is pushing ahead. I said earlier, 20% of EV sales in September, both in Europe and China. Tracking heat pumps is a bit more complicated, but very clearly we are seeing very high numbers on heat pumps as well. Smart meters being rolled out, and equally networks for electrification of vehicles. It's here. When we size these market opportunities, for us is clear that the companies that are going to take a competitive bet now will gain market share employment and growth and benefits. It's for us very, very clear at this point. Now, we have heard companies moving to net zero, civil society critically important in pushing on ambition. We have heard the finance sector moving as well. We remain with our view that for the type of transformation that we will need to see at global level, then governments really have the only unrivaled capacity to transform, put the policies in place, and unite all parts of societies to go into a clear one direction. We were asking for an unmistakable signal out of Glasgow. Some of it came out of Glasgow. Of course, more work to be done. But again, those governments that are putting forward the right policies will have a society that pays off on the short to medium to long term. I would conclude here. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Laura. It was a pleasure of hearing you here, and it was an outstanding presentation. And thank you for this mix between the WIO 2021 and the Glasgow report you did before this time. Now we are going to pass to this Q&A session, and we will have here with us Anna. She was collecting all this report. Pido unas ciertas disculpas porque parece que tenemos algún problema con la señal original de alguna gente que está escuchando, así que perdonadnos por eso. Así que le damos la palabra. We're going to give the floor to Anna to ask you several questions they sent us now and before. Anna.
Thank you very much, Arcadio. Thank you, Laura, for your very interesting presentation. We have received some questions in the chat regarding the methodology of the WIO. If you want, I can do a block of 2 or 3. So the first, I'm going to read it, is why do you make a difference between hydrogen and electricity when hydrogen is not a primary resource of energy? That is the first one. The second is which are the basic parameters for the estimations of the value of the international energy-related resources trade? These are the first 2 questions.
So hydrogen versus electricity. So what I showed, 2 important things. First, in final consumption terms, electricity is much, much larger than hydrogen in net zero world. So today, electricity is around 20% of final consumption. Hydrogen, we measure it in the 0 point something. Our expectation is that if we were in a world fully compatible with net zero by 2050, then electricity would be above 50%, probably in the 60%, and hydrogen around 10%. However, the big difference, at least in our assessment, in our modeling, is that the electricity will be transported. For example, in Europe, clearly cross-border trade is going to be important. In certain parts of Asia, Southeast Asia, cross-border trade will be important between Canada and the US. But we are not seeing very, very large amount of electricity being traded globally, a very large distance. It's going to be different for hydrogen. So clearly hydrogen, in fact, hydrogen-based fuels, as we call them more technically, so synthetic fuels, ammonia, and more hydrogen, really hydrogen, part of that will be transported at very long distances. So we are expecting Chile to ship maybe some to Europe, Australia to part of Asia, even the Middle East to part of Asia and probably Europe, part of Africa to Europe. So we are seeing part of that becoming really a long distance business, much more similar to the commodities that we're seeing today. So fully agree that we treat hydrogen in our analysis as a vector, very much like electricity, but there is a difference. We see remaining a price differential, important price differential between some of the domestic production so that it will become a part of the global trade without becoming a hydrogen-based economy. I can certainly share the values of each component later on. I want to say that it was pretty robust to the finding that I wouldn't want people to get too bugged on the precise values. It's more a message that critical minerals and hydrogen will grow. They may grow to different values that you've seen there. It's very difficult to get a precise number for 2030. So if I would bet something, I'm sure that those numbers that we showed there will be different, but not the direction. Not the direction that the critical mineral value will become larger, and not the direction that hydrogen value will, in global trade, will become larger. So I think I would like colleagues following here to get this notion that oil will remain, but much smaller, and critical minerals and hydrogen become larger.
Thank you very much. There is two more questions regarding methodology. One is, does the CO2 emissions associated with the manufacturing of new PV and wind generation accounted? And the second is about the population in the world is gonna grow until 9,700 million of people. Is this taken into account in your scenarios? Thank you.
Yes, so they're both taken into account. And in fact, I think it's very important to underline that in our assessment going to net zero, you actually have the electricity sector that goes to zero first, but very quickly thereafter, you start to need to decarbonize transport, buildings and industry. So the manufacturing part of the equation needs to move rather quickly with a combination of options, being hydrogen, in some cases being CCUS, being electrification, and through that, the life cycle of solar, of wind, and at the end of the day of all our anything that we will use and produce and consume will get eventually to net zero. So yes, we do take it into account, and it has loops that ensure that the accounting of CO2 is done properly. And I think here the key part is ensuring that you start seeing what is called sector coupling to ensure that all the economy eventually goes to zero. Population growth absolutely is one of the key parameters that we have in our modeling, together with also different urbanization patterns. People in urban areas consume much more than in certain rural areas, certainly true for Africa, where we are expecting to see most of the increase in population. So Africa first, then parts of Asia second. So this is fully taken into account. Also fully taken into account how the economy and the demographics will evolve. So those goes very much back to the deficit in low carbon investment that I was mentioning earlier, and where we really need to work more.
Thank you, Laura. I have two questions. One is regarding the COP result, and another is about a specific technology. The first is, why are we putting so much focus on methane nowadays? Please give us more details about the global methane pledge at the COP. Is this enough to meet the 1.5 degrees, and what sources are easiest to work on? And the second question is regarding nuclear. There is a lot of debate about nuclear power these days. Could you please give us some views about the role of this technology in the different IEA scenarios, and in particular about SMR, the small modular reactors, please? Thank you.
Thank you. So methane, why is it important? So first of all, methane per se without action on CO2 emission is not a good thing. However, methane, especially in the short term, so in the next 10, 20 years, since it's a very, very potent greenhouse gas, so you need 30 and plus molecule of CO2 to get the equivalent of the warming increase that you would get with methane. It's important to keep the increase in temperature that we will see in the coming years, because we are not going to stop using CO2, will not go to zero. So every time up until the moment CO2, we will emit CO2, we stock CO2 in the atmosphere, and therefore the temperature goes up. Methane allows us to prevent this to grow too much, because it is so much a potent greenhouse gas. That's why the focus on the next 10 years, next 20 years on methane is so essential to help, to give us more time to actually act on CO2 emissions and not see what is often referred to as overshoot. So we would go above 1.5 to then come back. If we help, if we use methane to help us drag down the temperature, this will help more difficult infrastructure investments that are needed on the CO2 side. So this is why methane is important. Does methane alone meet a longer term target? Not at all. So you need CO2 emissions to go to zero eventually. Otherwise, you don't reach, in fact, not even any temperature stabilization. You cannot reach it until the point you have CO2 getting to zero. Third, why is important the global methane pledge that was put out at COP? Because it's 100+ countries with also major oil and gas producers, which may not be as forthcoming on other parts of the energy transition, but are large emitters of methane. So it will prevent flaring, venting, or of those from those big emitters. What is stated is a 30% reduction that includes all methane sources. So methane is produced not only from the energy sector. The largest part actually comes from agriculture, but clearly agriculture has a lot of difficulties, equity issues as well. So our analysis would show actually that the energy sector can take the lead because the technology is there, is not very costly, and we know how to do it. So the relevance is ensuring that temperature don't spike, and cost-effective role of the energy sector. Nuclear. So I'd say that if I focus on reaching net zero by 2050, we would see three different elements for nuclear. First, existing nuclear power plants, mostly in advanced economies, and their role as we push in more renewables. In some cases, in our assessment, again, I underline this 55 times, if it is safe. So if it is safe, we find that it helps ensuring electricity security up until the moment where you have been able to have a system that can absorb in a good way all the fluctuations from variable renewables. So first role. Second role, in advanced, in emerging economies where China, for example, Russia and others, they're moving ahead with the nuclear programs very strongly. It has a role to play. It's built relatively quickly, and in those countries is actually phasing out coal. So it's displacing very critical emissions. So second role there. Third role, SMRs. We are hearing this more and more. Certainly there is huge interest from the US, from Canada, from Japan. We heard Macron last week, and a number of private companies actually putting money in R&D. Would this have an impact in the next 10, 20 years? No, it will not. But in the longer term, it could. And it has an interest that is not only, it could help not only providing electricity, but heat. And I think this is one of the hardest part now of the decarbonization. Once we have understood how to decarbonize electricity, heat becomes a huge issue. And we understand that SMRs, as they're smaller, more functional, could not only help producing electricity, but help for industrial decarbonization of it. So increasing momentum, is it for me too soon to say whether it will play a role, but certainly increasing interest from major countries that have stakes in nuclear.
Thank you, Laura. There is two more questions regarding methane emissions. One is about Russia. If Russia doesn't join the pledge to reduce methane leakage, could this hamper the import of blue hydrogen to the EU? And is similar, is if reducing methane emission leakage is so clean, why Russia doesn't want to join to the Glasgow pledge?
So I think Russia has a very clear understanding of what it means in terms of emissions, but I think there are geopolitical and cost considerations that are playing into the decision. So we have produced just before COP, and so maybe I will share the link later, Anna, so that you can share with the colleague that have asked this specific question. We have actually put out 5 actions that could be taken to make sure that even if countries don't join, could be nudged into taking action. And we were in discussions with the European Union. Certainly large gas importers, they have a huge negotiating power in certain periods of the year. So they could engage in discussions to ensure that certain standards are met, including on emissions reduction. So those was actually one of the 5 recommendations we have put forward. Again, Anna will be very happy to circulate those 5 later on. So that would be the answer.
Thank you. There is 2 new ones specific about Spain. If in a country like Spain with a moderate climate and good renewable resources, do you see an easier energy transition? And also they would like to know about how do you consider, if you consider that CCS is feasible in Spain, is possible in your model?
So on the first question on whether it's easier in moderate climate, I would argue that I mean, I'm not sure that I would define Spain a moderate climate. We have seen very high temperature in the south of Spain, and the expectation in climate models is that actually the temperature increase in the southern part will remain high. So there is a increase in demand for cooling coming there. So there is not the heating challenge for buildings, but there is the cooling challenge that is heightened. And for me, there is a common challenge with all countries in the world, which is what do we do with decarbonizing industry? So this is common to everyone, and I don't think that Spain is in an easier position than anyone else there. So I think Spain has been leading on the clearly on the power sector side. You have had being among the first movers in Europe, and now I'd say with beyond power, very, very comprehensive packages. But I'm not sure that there is some easiness. So I would again highlight the cooling part, as well as the hard to abate sectors that are equal everywhere, with a particular focus on industry. And I have to admit, I don't know about CCS in Spain. I haven't looked at neither the networks nor the storage capacities to give an answer that would be to the level of this audience. So I apologize. I will abstain myself from answering.
Perfect. There is some more question. I don't know if we have time, Arcadio.
Maybe one more, because she needs to leave.
Yes. Okay. Last question then. In the net zero scenario, you have shown that critical minerals will represent 47% of the international energy-related resource trade. Could you please talk a bit about the geopolitics implication of this, and could be the lack of minerals a problem in the future?
So I believe you've also had one of my colleagues presenting the report that we did earlier this year. So what we are seeing is actually demand for critical minerals for this decade being very, very strong. So you compare it in terms of rate of growth to what you see in electric vehicles. So it's clearly very high. Now, we looked at the main 5 or 6, looked at how demand evolves, look at where the resources are concentrated and look at how investments are going. And the findings are the following. First, is it a problem of resources? No. Resources are there. It's a problem of resource concentration. So you have certain type of minerals that are concentrated in a small amount of countries and not necessarily the easiest countries. So Africa is a big resource holder, China is a big resource holder. So while in many cases, not all, you have big corporations that are actually mining. In many cases, they are the same that were involved in coal mining. Is not the case for all countries. Some are already restricting access. So we are seeing many similarities, in fact, in the way critical minerals are coming to the market to what we see in terms of geopolitical considerations that you see in oil markets. So it's not a resource issue, it's a supply issue and bringing them to the market with two considerations. One, concentration being one, and the second, which is not necessarily related to concentration, is the ability of actually keeping up with the investment needed to make sure that the supply goes to our electric cars, to the wires, etc., etc. So there is so much infrastructure that will be needed and expansion that will be needed that we expect this to have some bumps. So with that, considering that critical minerals are used in the energy sector, but are used across a number of other things, electronics, it can be also defense. So there is some strategic consideration for some countries to start thinking about how do we go about making sure that the supplies are there when are needed. So this would be my summary.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you, Laura. Nobody asked you about the turbulences in the volatility in the markets right now. No, this is a little bit. What does the agency think about this, Laura? The last question. Very not easy.
No, not easy. So, and there are, again, I think geopolitical consideration very clearly linked to this. So I like very much what our executive director said, which is the following: if the winter is going to be cold, we're going to be seeing turbulent times. But what the ED said, I don't know how long the winter will be, but for sure we know the spring is coming. So I think we need to brace for a few difficult months, but if we continue to push ahead for the clean energy transition, then the years ahead should be easier.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Anna. I don't give you before, and thank you very much, Laura, for showing this update of the WIO, no? Because you made an update between WIO, COP, and several reports you did this year, no? And thank you very much. And I guess, I hope next time you will be here, we can comment something more about this. Thank you very much, and muchas gracias a todos.
Thank you, Arcadio. Thank you, Ana.
Muchas gracias a todos y disculpar a aquellos que hayan tenido problemas de sonido. Muchas gracias. Buenos días a todos. Buenos días.
Sí, ya pueden hablar, ya están fuera, ¿eh?